folks, and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk a little bit more about some of my own personal piercings, most notably my paired labret piercings. And really what I want to talk about with them today is the fact that they are crooked. Yes, that is right, my labret piercings are crooked. My right one in particular is incredibly crooked, so let's talk about it. Now I want to talk about this because my labrets are a perfect example of the way a very experienced piercer and a very knowledgeable and understanding client can work together to make some magic happen and safely achieve our piercing goals. I'm going to preface this video by saying that this is not an example that would work for every single person. This is something that worked out specifically for my mouth, my anatomy, my teeth, and my unique situation. The purpose of this video is not to go tell everyone that if they want labret piercings like mine, they should go get crooked piercings. The point is rather to share an example of how a piercer and a client can work together on an individual basis to create a plan to get that person the piercings that they want. And it is a reminder of how much we as piercers can do on a case-by-case basis to work with our clients to achieve their goals. My labret piercings, let's talk about them. I had wanted paired labrets, aka snake bites, for literally so long. I fell in love with them in the Tumblr era, scene queen, MySpace days. I remember looking at all of these pictures of all of the famous scene kids online and just being in love with the paired labrets. And of course, all of the artwork and photographs on Tumblr with them. You know, I had to want them. However, I had braces from like a relatively young age. So I did have to wait until I got my braces off before I could get anything done. Now, when I first had my lip pierced, I actually had a center lower labret, I think in my sophomore or junior year of high school. I think this was sophomore year actually, but here's some baby Lynn with my little center labret. I loved it, but I very quickly realized it was not exactly perfectly centered and took it out, but I really wanted paired labrets, and I knew I wanted to wear hoops in them most particularly. Now, Lynn at 16 was thinking of just like, you know, whatever, steel horseshoes, probably with black spikes on them, you know, full scene kid, but I just knew that I really preferred the look of rings in lip piercing, so I knew that that was my goal. Even though I was in braces for a really long time, I still have some like uneven teeth and some crowding on my bottom teeth. Essentially what I guess happened was when they like put spacers in my mouth, and I had an expander for a little bit, and they like created the new shape of my jawline. They didn't quite leave as much space as they should have. So once I stopped wearing braces, even with my retainer, my bottom row kind of started to crowd again a little bit, and I ended up with a tiny bit of a snaggle tooth. And I basically found out that unless I got a permanent bonded retainer on my lower teeth, that was going to always happen. And I've tried Invisalign multiple times, and I've tried like Smile Direct and whatever to get my bottom row to uncrowd, and it just kind of doesn't want to. So especially on the right side of my lower jaw, I have some crowding, I have some overlap, I have a snaggle tooth there. So this posed an issue with my goals for some of my labret piercings. Now around 17, 18, I was just starting to work in the piercing industry, and I was also just starting to learn about quality, safe piercing. I knew I wanted to do paired labrets on my lower lip, but I also knew with the crowding of my teeth, that was going to make things pretty difficult. And I remember sitting in the first studio that I worked at, looking at my teeth in the mirror and looking at my lips in the mirror and really trying to puzzle out how I was going to make this happen safely for me. And this is because, I'm going to throw some diagrams up here, but if we looked at the way my teeth crowded on the right side, and I knew I wanted to wear hoops, when I looked at how that hoop would fit, and I actually used a size placement ring at the time, I slid a captive ring onto my lip, and kind of felt how it would lay, and it was going to hit that snaggle tooth, it was going to hit that overlap pretty badly. And of course, as much as I wanted these piercings, I didn't want to mess up my teeth. And even though I was a baby apprentice at not the best studio at the time, I still knew that a regular labret would spell doom for my teeth and the placement where I wanted it. I could tell that it was going to rub and snag and catch on my teeth. Now, this is in the early days of me learning about quality safe piercing. Yes, I'm already in an apprenticeship not knowing about quality safe piercing. I trusted my first studio and my first piercer and where I ended up working, and it was very difficult for me when I found out that that was not the case. But I started seeing other quality piercers and APP members at studio around me, and one I went and spoke to about my paired labrets, and we talked about this at length. And that piercer's suggestion was, what if we do the piercing on an angle, knowing that hoops are your goal and what your goal is to wear, to keep the hoop away from where your teeth crowd and overlap. And this sounded perfect to me. Now, of course, this meant that I was basically always going to be locked into wearing hoops in my paired labrets. It was really never going to be a great option for me to wear studs. But at the time, I was like, hey, I'm dead set on hoops. Like, I'm fine with that. And so basically, if we look at how a true, correct, straight labret piercing would have rested with the overlap and crowding of my teeth, even with a hoop in, it would have rubbed and caught. However, if we did the piercing at an angle like this, yes, it is technically a crooked piercing, and as we can see in this diagram, with a stud, that disc is lifted off. It's not perpendicular to the inside of my lip. It's going to catch and rub an enormous amount on my overlap. But once the piercing is healed enough for a hoop is going to be angled forward and away from my teeth. And because of the way my teeth and my lips rest when closed, it's really never going to contact my teeth unless I'm doing certain bigger motions. And this was what that piercer proposed to me, and I said yes. I was all for it. I said, let's do it. We pierced them. I had the long bars in initially. It was one of the most miserable experiences I've had healing an oral piercing, and that's saying something because I've had a lot of oral piercings, but I could definitely feel those discs scraping against my teeth, catching while I ate, very uncomfortable. And then, like, right at that 3-month mark, I go ahead and I get my hoops in. And here are some pictures of baby Lynn with my first hoops in my lip. And you can see I'm still going back and forth on that center labret. But hoops immediately, so freaking comfortable. The piercer that I saw nailed the angle, nailed the placement, and I still obviously have my paired labrets to this day with no damage to my teeth or gums. I am going to try and get some pictures of how my labrets sit with their hoops in now. No promises. But if I do, here are some photos so you can kind of see how these piercings sit in reality. But this was super successful for me, and I was able to have the piercings that I really wanted without it causing damage and interference to my teeth and issues with my gums. Now, for those of you at home wondering, I am pretty locked into wearing hoops in these. Every now and again, for a couple months, you'll see me pop studs in, and basically what I do is wear really short, small back threadless posts in my lower labrets, and they just nest an intense amount. However, you'll notice I never wear studs for more than a few months at a time, and this is partially because I just don't like the look of them as much, obviously. My heart was like set on hoops in my labret, but it's also partially because studs become very uncomfortable over time. Even with the right fit bar, even with getting them to nest, because of the angles these piercings are done at, eventually studs start to have problems. The nesting kind of starts to border more on embedding. They get really uncomfortable. They get caught and snagged on things. So basically, like every few years I get a wild hair and I wear studs for a little bit, and then I go right back to my hoops. There are times when I wish I could wear studs in my labrets all the time, where I think that that is a nice look, or I'm tired of dealing with the hoops, and I just kind of want to change things up. And it is sometimes a little bit of a bummer not being able to do that, I will not lie. But overall, I would way rather have the piercings and get to enjoy them, and enjoy them in the way that I prefer, which is with hoops, than simply not have the piercings. But I will say, I definitely did undertake a pretty big risk in agreeing to do this. I do vividly remember while these were still healing and they had studs in, them just being just awful and getting caught and rubbing on my teeth and just being really uncomfortable. But obviously lip piercings swell, so if we had pierced them and installed hoops or put in hoops really early on, the hoops would have had to have been really oversized to allow for that swelling, would just have been ridiculous. It would have also been really uncomfortable to eat. And just from eating with my hoops now, that these piercings are a decade old and very well healed, it would have caused probably even more damage. But I did sign for some pretty big risks in deciding to get these, and the period while they were healing and with studs in, I definitely risked damage to my teeth and gums. And that was kind of like an informed consent decision where I'm very grateful that the piercer I saw took the time to talk with me about these risks and give me that information. But at the end of the day, I had a bunch of piercings, I was working in the industry, I'd wanted these for a really long time, I understood the risks, and I consented in that situation, especially because it wasn't like we were doing like a blatantly unsafe piercing that was going to put me at risk for forever. We were doing a piercing that was going to put me at a little bit of a higher risk for a few months to put me at a lower risk long term. Because remember, if we did straight labret piercings for me, which would have had me at a lower risk initially, in order to wear my gold jewelry of hoops, it would have put me at a higher risk for the long term of having these piercings because I have that overlap and that crowding on my teeth. It would have been very easy for the piercer I saw to have just said, no, hey, you have overlap and crowding on your teeth here. You know, I don't think it's a good idea for us to do this piercing. And if my snaggletooth had been more severe, if my overlap had been more severe, if the shape and curvature of my lips were different, if I had thinner lips or my lips sat a lot closer to my teeth when I talked and ate, that might have been a reason for that piercer to just say, no, I don't think this is going to be safe. Fortunately, the stars kind of aligned, and despite the fact that I had this snaggle tooth that made doing this really hard, I did have really good lip and lip shape anatomy to try something like this, and my piercer was willing to go ahead and give me the information and try and see if it worked for me. And I was comfortable with the risks and willing to do that. And I wanted to come on here and talk about this today for a few reasons. One is that I think a lot of us can sometimes get really caught up and discouraged in not having the anatomy for something or having something that makes something difficult. And I think sharing stories of success and ways that piercers have worked with anatomy to do things successfully is a really good way of helping people not feel as discouraged. I also think it's important to be honest and come on here and say that we as piercers take risks and practice informed consent even with our own bodies. I think it's one thing for me to talk about informed consent scenarios where I am the piercer, but I think it's very different to hear from it from a client perspective of me at 17 and 18, you know, sitting down and talking about the risks to my teeth and to my gums and how we can manage it and how I can balance the really very real risks of damaging my mouth with the piercings that I do really want to have for the rest of my life, and how we can find a middle ground there. And lastly, I really want to talk about this because I think when it comes to oral piercings, there's sometimes, I think, a bit of fear-mongering surrounding the risks of oral piercings. But on the other hand, I think those fears are really reasonable, and oral piercings can carry some pretty serious risks to our teeth and gums, and we need to be able to talk about that. And we need to acknowledge that every oral piercing carries some amount of risk to your tooth and gums, and that in getting any piercing in your mouth, you are agreeing and consenting to there being a risk of damage to your teeth, to your gums, to your enamel, to your overall oral health and hygiene. But we can minimize that risk greatly. And personally, I feel like the situation with my labrets and the way we angled them, knowing my goals were hoops, knowing what I wanted to wear, I feel like I have less issues with these than I would have if I smoked, or if I didn't brush my teeth correctly, or if I chewed tobacco. Like, all in all, in the grand scheme of things, there's still a risk because I have metal in my mouth every single day, but that risk is way lower than a lot of other really unsafe piercings than it could have been if we hadn't customized this approach to doing these piercings for my anatomy and my situation, and way lower risk than a lot of other activities people engage in all the time. So while there are risks inherent in any oral piercing, there's also a lot of ways a really good piercer can minimize that. And a really big element of that is a piercer that's going to work with your unique anatomy. You don't have one-size-fits-all bodies, so what approach works for me is not going to work for another person, is not going to necessarily work for you, and that's okay. But as clients, you want to seek out a piercer who's going to be willing to work with your body and your unique anatomy, and who's also going to be really honest about that, and who's going to take a look and let you know the risks, and let you know what your options are, but also, to a certain extent, be willing to give you the ability to give informed consent with your body. And the key word there is informed consent. Sometimes I will just decline to do piercings where I feel like a client can't fully understand or have the information of the risks, or the risks are just too high that they're out of my comfort zone as a piercer, and I don't want to be responsible just in general, but especially legally, for something that can cause like very serious amounts of damage. And, you know, snake eyes, horizontal lip piercings, things like that. But when we're talking about something where we can really minimize the risk of damage and bring it down to a super low level, I think it's nice to know that that's sometimes an option, and it's nice to know that there's piercers out there who are able to work with you and figure that out. But that is the story of my cool, crooked paired labret piercings. And I really hope if you're thinking about lip piercings or oral piercings in general, or if you've been turned away in the past because of anatomy, this video can give you some hope for finding ways to minimize risk or finding piercers who are capable of working with your body. Please remember that this is the fix that worked for my unique anatomy. It is not a one-size-fits-all fix, and I do not want to see all of you running into your piercing studios asking for crooked lip piercings. Find a good piercer that you trust and let them assess your anatomy. And obviously, I hope that all of you has the right tooth and gum and mouth anatomy to just get straight, comfortable, perfect labrets and not have to worry about taking the risks that I did. But if that's not the case, and you have some unfortunately unsuitable anatomy like me, maybe you can find someone who can work with it. As per usual, your support means the world to me, so if you like this video, if you like the content I put out, please hit like and subscribe, and I can't wait to sit down and hang out with y'all again soon. Bye!